Well, look, the law is very clear. The Communications Act says you have to operate in the public interest. And if you don't, yes, one of the consequences is potentially losing your license. And of course, that's on the table. I mean, look, broadcast licenses are not sacred cows. At the same time, when you think about media, separate into two issues, right? You've got the national networks, for instance, ABC, NBC, CBS. They provide a lot of the content that the actual licensed local broadcasts disseminate. And so we need to look at empowering those local broadcasters to serve their local communities, even if that's in conflict with the interest of those national networks.
So is the incoming Trump administration trying to use the federal government to shut down the mainstream media networks? Well, of course, that is the Democrat fear-mongering that we heard for all of the 2024 election. He's going to arrest journalists and do all this stuff. But in today's video, I want to actually talk about what Trump's FCC pick recently said about the idea of revoking the license to use public airwaves from a lot of the big networks like CBS and ABC that we have seen are practicing a very huge liberal bias. And I'll tell you why that is not anti-free speech, and I actually support this idea in this video. So folks, do us a big favor. If you enjoy the content, make sure you hit that like button down below. Subscribe if you are new. Help us shut down the mainstream media by smashing that red button and helping us get to our goal of 400K subs by the end of the year. And with that said, let's just play really quickly. Okay, so this is a comment that the Trump FCC chairman pick, Brandon Carr, recently said on CNBC, and we'll explain what he's kind of saying here in a second. Okay.
When you say things to take a fresh look at, what are you talking about?
You look on the media side, I think there's no question that trust in media is an all-time low. That's just not my opinion alone. Jeff Bezos did an op-ed recently where he noted how media used to be the most trusted institution in America, and for a long time, at least they could say we're more trusted than Congress, and now that has passed as well. It's fallen to the bottom. And so I think there's a lot that needs to take place to restore trust and confidence in media. And there's a role for the FCC, at least on the broadcast side, for instance. They have to operate in the public interest. And I think it's probably appropriate for the FCC to take a fresh look at what that requirement looks like.
So, I mean, is that signaling that others have said you've done, that you're open to TV networks having their licenses revoked if they have, for example, perceived liberal bias?
Well, look, the law is very clear. The Communications Act says you have to operate in the public interest. And if you don't, yes, one of the consequences is potentially losing your license. And of course, that's on the table. I mean, look, broadcast licenses are not sacred cows. At the same time, when you think about media, separate into two issues, right? You've got the national networks, for instance, ABC, NBC, CBS. They provide a lot of the content that the actual licensed local broadcasts disseminate. And so we need to look at empowering those local broadcasters to serve their local communities, even if that's in conflict with the interest of those national networks. I mean, at the end of the day, you got all this content from Hollywood and New York that's being distributed down through these local broadcasters. Let's make sure they feel empowered to do the right thing by their local community.
Yeah, and this is actually an idea I remember Trump went out and talked about on Truth Social after, I believe it was the 60 Minutes scandal combined with the vice presidential debate, where he outright said that CBS's license to broadcast should be revoked. And of course, all of the Democrat campaign supporters lost their freaking minds. They said he's trying to shut down journalism. This is anti-free speech. He's going to use the federal government to be seizing all of these things. But actually, having done a little bit of research in this regard, I, again, absolutely support this idea, and I'll tell you why. So, what is the difference between a network like CNN, for instance, and CBS, right? And I'll explain to you why this is not a violation of the First Amendment. Well, basically how it works is the non-cable networks, right? The legacy media like ABC, NBC, CBS, I believe maybe even Fox 11 falls into that regard. I'm not sure. But those non-cable networks actually get their license to broadcast from the FCC, right? From the federal government themselves, because they're using the public airwaves to do what they're going to do. And the whole stipulation of that is in order to maintain that license, they have to operate what's called within the public interest, right? The idea there is they can't be partisan, they can't be biased to one political ideology or one political party. And this is why, for instance, on a show like The View, which is obviously massively liberally biased, I mean, I'm not sure anyone's going to argue that, but the reason it's allowed to go on those so-called public airwaves is because, well, they have the token conservative on the panel, right? So this is why Meghan McCain and Alyssa Farah Griffin and a lot of other people have been the supposedly conservative voice on The View, even though they're not really all that conservative, because then The View can turn around and say, oh, well, we are operating in the public interest because it's a public discussion where we are given, a fair shake to make the argument to both sides. It's like, no, that's obviously not the case. Your entire show is liberal propaganda, but you are operating on the public airwaves where you're not supposed to be doing that, right? So that's why I say this whole issue of broadcast licensing, I think, is outdated to begin with. I think you should make them all private. But also, again, I think at this point, it is pretty indisputable that these legacy networks are not operating within the so-called public interest. And I think that, for instance, this year's presidential debates are a prime example of how those networks are not operating within the public interest.
Just to clarify for our viewers, Springfield, Ohio does have a large number of Haitian migrants who have legal status, temporary protected status.
Well, Margaret, but
thank you, Senator. We have so much to get to.
Margaret, I think it's important because
we're going to turn out of the economy. Thank you,
Margaret. The rules were that you guys weren't going to fact check, and since you're fact checking me, I think it's important to say what's actually going on. So there's an application called the CBP One app, where you can go on as an illegal migrant, apply for asylum or apply for parole, and be granted legal status at the wave of a Kamala Harris open border wand. That is not a person coming in, applying for a green card and waiting for 10 years. That is the facilitation of illegal immigration, Margaret, by our own leadership.
Thank you, Senator, for describing the legal process. We have so much to get to, Senator.
Those laws have been on the books since 1990.
Thank you, gentlemen.
The CBP One app has not been on the books since 1990. It's something that Kamala Harris created, Margaret.
Gentlemen, the audience can't hear you because your mics are cut.
Well, there you have it. And look, Vance was right. Okay? There's nuance to it. But the bigger problem is why he was moved on. We've got so much to get to. This says who? You know what I mean? Like, what is the schedule here? So you have a list of topics? That's not what it's about. It's about how the American people can access these two men and the two theories and the narratives, and you got to let them have their speak, because now you created a story where you're the problem.
Yeah, so that right there, I think, is a prime example of why the licenses of these networks, in my opinion, should be revoked. And to be clear, before someone says, oh, but that's anti-First Amendment. Okay, so let's be concrete about this. Does CBS have a right, a First Amendment right to be liberally biased? Yes. Does The View have the First Amendment right to go and spew all the nonsense they do? Yes, they do. But what we are saying here is they do not have an inherent right to use the public FCC airwaves to do this, right? They can go and buy the same private license and be the same private network that CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News all collectively do, right? But the argument is you should just make them be private networks then. Because the argument that any of these networks currently are operating within the so-called public interest, right? They're non-biased. They're just journalists reporting the facts to the American people in an objective way. That's obviously not true. Hypothetically, if there were some type of legacy network that were really right-wing biased and they were constantly running cover for the Republicans, I would equally say, yeah, they have the right to run cover for the Republicans, but they have to use their own private airwaves, right? You can't just, give them the public rights to do all that stuff. So honestly, what I'm saying all collectively here is I think it's a great idea. I'm not sure how much it would really negatively impact the business for ABC and CBS, although people who don't have cable and are just watching TV on the old school 1980s satellite, I don't know if that exists anywhere in this country anymore, but maybe you would lose a couple viewers here and there. Womp womp. Nobody really cares. So sad for them. But ultimately, again, guys, these are no longer the days of Walter Cronkite and the objective evening news where he's just going to sit down and read the news stories. No, right? These networks all have opinions. And I say if they want to express them, go ahead. But I absolutely support the idea that the Trump FCC should say, okay, but we're removing your public license because you're obviously biased. So, go do your thing. But we're not going to use the federal airwaves to continue broadcasting your propaganda. 100% support. We can do that for both sides. I think it's fair. And, at least that way the media can be honest about their bias and stop having to sit there and pretend that we're actually within the public interest and totally objective, because no, you're not. No, you're not. So I think this is a great idea. Let me know, though, your thoughts on this in the comment section down below. Be sure to leave a like on this video, guys. Subscribe if you are new. And until next time, God bless and peace.